Jason sat quietly on the couch, the weight of the world still pressing heavily on his chest, but there was something different now. Rocky, the German shepherd, was curled up at his feet, its soft breathing the only sound in the room. The dog had settled in quickly, becoming a constant presence, a silent companion. The days seemed to pass more slowly now, but they were no longer filled with the same crushing silence that had once consumed Jason. Every morning, Rocky would nudge him awake, its large brown eyes filled with purpose. It didn't matter if Jason wanted to stay buried in his blankets. The dog wasn't having it. Slowly, Jason began to get up with the dog, taking those first shaky steps outside. The fresh air hit him harder than he expected, and for a moment, he hesitated. But Rocky, ever patient, walked beside him, guiding him forward. With each step, Jason felt a little lighter. It wasn't much, but it was something. One morning, as Jason stood outside, watching the sun rise, he felt something shift inside him. The deep ache that had always been there, that had clung to him like a second skin, seemed a little less intense. It wasn't gone, but it was quieter, as if it had been put in the background, just enough for him to breathe again. Rocky sat next to him, looking up at the sky as if he, too, was watching the world wake up. Jason smiled softly. It was the first time in a long time that he felt like he was part of the world again. Rocky's presence had done something Jason couldn't explain. The dog didn't judge, didn't rush him, didn't ask him to be anything other than what he was in that moment. It was the kind of unconditional support Jason had never experienced from anyone, not in the way Rocky gave it. As the days went on, Jason started to open up to the dog more. He talked to Rocky, something he hadn't done with anyone in years. The dog's steady gaze never wavered, as if listening to every word. At times, Jason felt foolish, speaking to a dog as though it could understand every word. But there was something about it that made him feel safe, as though his thoughts, his feelings, his pain, were not a burden. One afternoon, while Jason was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought, Rocky stood up, trotted over, and nudged his hand with its nose. Jason looked down at the dog, surprised by the gentle insistence. Without thinking, he reached down and scratched Rocky behind the ears. The dog's tail wagged enthusiastically, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jason felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He didn't realize how much he had needed this connection, this simple act of companionship. It was then that Jason realized that it wasn't just the dog's presence that was helping him. It was the bond they were forming, the trust they were building together. Jason wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that with Rocky by his side, maybe, just maybe, he could start to find his way back. The path to healing wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Jason felt like he had someone in his corner, someone who truly understood the weight of his struggles, without saying a word. He wasn't alone anymore. As weeks passed, Jason found himself waking up each morning with a little less dread. Rocky's presence had become a constant comfort, a reminder that no matter how dark the days seemed, there was something, or rather, someone, who depended on him. The mornings were easier now. The fog in his mind wasn't as thick, and though the memories still lingered, they didn't consume him like they used to. Rocky seemed to know when Jason was struggling, often nudging him with his nose or sitting quietly by his side, as if to say, "I'm here." One morning, after a particularly restless night, Jason stood in front of his apartment window, staring out at the world. The sunlight was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the street. For the first time in a long while, Jason felt a small flicker of hope. He looked down at Rocky, who was lying on the floor, watching him. "You know, buddy," Jason said, his voice hoarse, "I think we've got this." Rocky's tail thumped the floor, and Jason couldn't help but smile. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward. It wasn't just the dog that had helped him heal. It was the way Rocky had shown up when he needed it most, without hesitation, without asking for anything. In return, the dog's loyalty was unwavering, its patience endless. And for Jason, that was the kind of healing he never thought he'd find. As Jason began to venture out more, with Rocky by his side, he started to reconnect with the world. He took long walks through the park, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. He talked to neighbors, smiled at strangers. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others, but with Rocky by his side, he felt like he had a reason to keep moving forward. It was during one of these walks that Jason met someone who would change his life in ways he never expected. They were at the park, Jason and Rocky walking along the path, when a woman approached them. She smiled as she saw Rocky, and Jason found himself smiling too. "He's a beautiful dog," the woman said, crouching down to pet Rocky. "You must be his best friend." Jason hesitated before answering. "I guess you could say that. He's been helping me more than I've helped him." The woman nodded, her expression softening. "I can see that," she said, giving Rocky one last pat before standing up. "You know, animals like him, they have a way of saving us when we don't even realize we need saving." Jason nodded, unsure of how to respond. But as the woman walked away, something inside him stirred. It was a small spark, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this journey. He had Rocky, and now, maybe, there was the possibility of more. As he and Rocky continued their walk, Jason felt the weight of the world lift just a little. He wasn't fully healed, but he was healing. And with each step, he was learning to live again. Jason stood at the park bench, his hand resting gently on Rocky's back as the dog lay beside him, looking up at him with those ever-patient eyes. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It had been a few months since that first day Rocky had come into his life, and though the weight of the past still lingered, it felt a little easier to carry now. With every walk, every small conversation, Jason was starting to see the world around him in a new light. He had started taking the long way home, walking around the neighborhood to see the sights, to hear the sounds, and to feel the world once more. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the shadows of the past crept up on him, threatening to pull him back into that deep, dark hole he had fought so hard to escape. But on those days, Rocky was there. The dog seemed to sense when Jason was struggling, nudging him with its nose or sitting quietly beside him, never pushing, always patient. It was in those quiet moments that Jason realized just how much he had come to depend on the dog. One evening, as they walked through the park, Jason noticed a group of kids playing soccer nearby. The laughter of the children filled the air, and Jason couldn't help but smile at the sound. He hadn't realized how much he missed hearing the joy of others. Rocky, sensing his shift in mood, wagged his tail and trotted over to join the children. The kids immediately stopped what they were doing and ran over, excited to meet the dog. Jason watched as Rocky interacted with them, jumping and playing, his tail wagging so hard it almost seemed like he was smiling. It was as though the dog was saying, "I'm okay now, and so are you." Jason felt a warmth spread through his chest as he observed the scene. It was as if Rocky had become a bridge, connecting him to a world he had once shut himself off from. The dog didn't just help him heal, it helped him reconnect with life. Later that evening, as they sat on the couch together, Rocky's head resting on Jason's lap, Jason reflected on how far he had come. The road to healing was far from over, but it was no longer a road he had to walk alone. He had Rocky by his side, and that made all the difference. He reached down to scratch the dog's ears, smiling softly. "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" The dog looked up at him, tail thumping against the floor in agreement. In that moment, Jason knew that no matter what came next, he could face it. With Rocky by his side, he had everything he needed to keep moving forward. Jason stood in front of the small local coffee shop, the sun warming his face as he took a deep breath. The last few months had felt like a blur, a series of steps forward and a few steps back. But today, something felt different. Today, he was taking another step forward. Rocky, as always, was by his side, sitting patiently at his feet. Jason had noticed a change in himself. The man who had once preferred solitude, who had retreated into the darkness of his mind, now found himself engaging more with the world around him. Small interactions, like the ones with the children at the park, had opened something inside him. He was learning to enjoy the simple pleasures again, like the sound of birds in the trees or the feel of a warm cup of coffee in his hands. As Jason walked into the coffee shop, the familiar chime of the door greeting him felt like a small victory. He smiled at the barista, who greeted him with a warm, friendly smile. "Morning, Jason." "The usual?" she asked. He nodded, his throat tight, but not in the way it once had been. "Yeah, the usual," he replied, his voice steady. He was starting to feel like he belonged here, like he was more than just the man who had returned from war. He was Jason, just Jason. As he waited for his coffee, he watched as Rocky lay down near the door, content to just be with him. The dog's steady presence had become his anchor. It was as if, with Rocky beside him, he could face whatever came his way. Jason's mind often wandered back to the days when he felt lost, when every waking moment was a struggle to push through the pain, when every sound, every image, reminded him of the battlefield. But now it was different. Now he had a purpose. His purpose was to heal, and in that healing, he had found a new sense of hope. When the barista handed him his coffee, Jason took it with a nod of gratitude. He could feel a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward. As he made his way out of the coffee shop, he felt lighter than he had in years. The day was bright, and for the first time in a long time, Jason looked forward to what it might bring. He looked down at Rocky, who was wagging his tail, as if to say, "We've got this." And Jason believed it. With Rocky by his side, there was no limit to what he could do. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to walk it, one step at a time. Jason and Rocky were walking down the familiar path in the park once again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the ground. It had become a ritual, one of the few things that still brought Jason a sense of peace. The breeze rustled through the trees, and the soft chirping of birds filled the air. He looked down at Rocky, whose fur rippled with the wind, his amber eyes bright with energy. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a few months. It wasn't just the walks or the routine that helped, though they played a part. It was the small, everyday moments that Jason had learned to appreciate again. He had started working part-time at a local veteran support center. At first, the thought of being around others, sharing his story, felt impossible. But with Rocky by his side, he felt more confident. The dog had become more than just a companion. He was a bridge to the outside world. In the mornings, Jason would take Rocky to the center, where they both offered a kind of silent support. The other veterans, some of whom had faced similar struggles, would smile when they saw Rocky. The dog would walk around, sitting by people's feet, offering comfort in ways words couldn't. Jason had started to feel like he had a purpose again, something to give back. Slowly, the weight of the past began to feel more manageable. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer controlling him. As they walked, Jason noticed the light was beginning to fade, the park becoming quieter as the day came to an end. He looked at Rocky again, and this time, he spoke aloud, as though the dog could understand every word. "I don't know what I would have done without you, buddy," he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. Rocky stopped in his tracks and looked up at him, as if understanding the gravity of the words. Then, in that familiar way, the dog wagged his tail and nudged Jason's hand with his nose. Jason smiled, reaching down to pet Rocky, his fingers running through the dog's fur. In that simple moment, Jason realized how far he had come. There were still tough days, moments when the weight of his experiences would come crashing back, but with Rocky by his side, he felt like he could face them. The bond they shared had become more than just companionship. It was a partnership, a lifeline. As they continued walking, Jason felt the last traces of tension leave his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he was walking forward, not looking back. There was still a long road ahead, but with Rocky by his side, he knew he wasn't alone. He had found something he hadn't thought possible, a new beginning. Jason sat at the small table in his kitchen, staring at the mug of coffee in front of him. It was early in the morning, the sun just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow across the room. Rocky lay nearby, as usual, his head resting on his paws, watching Jason with those familiar, knowing eyes. The room was quiet, the world outside still asleep. Jason had learned to appreciate moments like this, the stillness before the world woke up, the peace that had once seemed so far out of reach. He hadn't been sure he could ever feel this calm again, but with each passing day, it was becoming clearer that things were changing. He was changing. His thoughts often returned to the time before Rocky had come into his life, when everything felt overwhelming and uncertain. But now, everything seemed a little brighter. He felt a sense of purpose again, a connection to the world that he hadn't thought possible. And a big part of that was because of Rocky. The dog had been more than a companion. He had been Jason's anchor, his reminder that there was still good in the world, still love, still hope. After weeks of slow progress, Jason had begun to feel ready to take on more. He had signed up for therapy again, a step he hadn't thought he'd ever take. The thought of opening up to someone about the depths of his pain had always terrified him. But with Rocky by his side, it felt a little easier. For the first time, he wasn't walking into that therapy room alone. As he sat there, drinking his coffee, he thought about the future. It wasn't all mapped out. There were still a lot of unknowns. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. He wasn't in control of everything, but he was in control of how he faced it. And with Rocky by his side, he knew he could handle whatever came his way. The dog lifted his head slightly, giving a soft whine as if to say, "Let's go." Jason smiled and stood up, his legs still a little stiff, but stronger than they used to be. Rocky followed him, tail wagging, eager for their morning walk. Jason grabbed his jacket and opened the door, stepping out into the cool morning air. The day ahead was full of possibility, and for the first time in a long time, Jason was ready to embrace it. With Rocky by his side, he was no longer facing the world alone. Jason walked slowly through the park, the air cool and crisp against his skin. Rocky was at his side, as always, trotting alongside him with a calm energy that had become his constant companion. The last few months had been a journey of small, quiet victories, each step forward a reminder that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow process, but with each day, Jason felt more alive, more present. He looked down at Rocky, who looked up at him with those intelligent, loyal eyes. They had become a team, not just in the sense that Rocky helped him find his way, but in the sense that they shared an understanding. Neither of them was perfect, but together they had found a way to keep going. As they walked, Jason's thoughts wandered to the therapy sessions he had started attending. At first, it had been terrifying to speak about the things he had locked away for so long. But with each session, he began to feel lighter. His therapist had told him that healing was a journey, not a destination. And Jason was learning to accept that. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about taking it one day at a time, acknowledging the pain when it came, but not letting it control him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from the pain. He was learning to live alongside it. And with Rocky by his side, it didn't seem so overwhelming. As they reached the bench at the park, Jason sat down, feeling the familiar weight of Rocky's head resting on his lap. The dog looked up at him, tail thumping against the ground in contentment. Jason smiled, reaching down to scratch Rocky's ears. "You're a good boy," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't just the dog's companionship that had made the difference. It was the way Rocky had shown him what it meant to be present, to be patient, to live in the moment. As they sat there together, watching the world go by, Jason felt something inside him shift. He had come a long way from the man who had felt lost and broken. There were still challenges ahead, still days when the shadows of the past would try to pull him back, but now he knew he had the strength to face them. He wasn't alone anymore. With Rocky at his side, he had everything he needed to keep moving forward. Jason sat on the porch, his feet resting on the cool wooden steps as Rocky lay at his side, his head resting on Jason's lap. The day was winding down, and the sky was painted with soft hues of pink and orange as the sun slowly set behind the trees. It had been a year since Rocky had come into his life, and Jason couldn't help but reflect on how far they had both come. There had been struggles, of course, moments when Jason had doubted whether he would ever truly heal, but those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. The therapy, the daily walks, the small victories, each of them had helped him piece together the man he had once been and the man he was still becoming. He had learned to forgive himself for the things he couldn't control, to let go of the guilt that had weighed him down for so long. He had learned to trust again, not just in the people around him, but in himself. Rocky, in his quiet, steadfast way, had been the one constant through it all. He had been Jason's companion, his rock, his reminder that love and loyalty could heal even the deepest wounds. Jason stroked Rocky's fur, the dog's body warm against his hand. "We've made it, haven't we, buddy?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rocky's tail wagged lazily, and Jason couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the dog's presence that had changed everything. It was the bond they had formed, the unspoken understanding between them. As Jason looked out at the horizon, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was still unknown, but he no longer feared it. He knew that whatever came his way, he would face it with Rocky by his side. He had learned to embrace the present, to cherish the moments of peace and quiet, to find joy in the simple things. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was not the man he had been, and he was not yet the man he would become. But he was on the path, and with Rocky's steady presence beside him, Jason felt ready to continue walking it, one step at a time.